So, starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 475,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,040 in the past day. Then, as for hardware losses, 5 tanks, 34 APVs, and a whopping 38 artillery, plus 1 air defense system. So we'll head across to the map today and start out in the very south, as Ukrainian military intelligence produced some footage putting on display one of their Magura V5 drone strikes at a Russian Coast Guard boat in occupied Crimea in Vuzka Bay near Chernomorska, which is about 200 kilometers or maybe 120 miles from the nearest point on Ukrainian land that it could have been deployed from. And so far today, reportedly 5 Magura V5s were used, with another one we saw destroyed by a Russian Ka-29 helicopter somewhere in the Black Sea. Interestingly, that one was carrying an R-73 air-to-air missile with one empty slot, which leads itself to suggest that the other missile had already been fired. And so far, little more is known of these events at recording, but it's certainly keeping Russian naval forces on their toes right now, that's for sure. Then headed more north to one of the border regions, as a Russian battalion of the Airborne Division has been redeployed by the Russian military to the Kursk Oblast. This move is part of a larger effort by Russia to amass a significant force in the area for a potential future offensive operation targeting northeastern Ukraine and Kharkiv city itself, with the force expected to operate mainly in the Belgorod-Kharkiv operational direction. Also, they're forming the grouping of forces primarily drawing from elements of the Leningrad military district, so think St. Petersburg region of Russia. Although on that note, Russia was forced to exhaust a lot of their manpower from that northern military district already, and a long time ago, to support their forces in Ukraine. In fact, at a certain point, there was only token border forces on the Russian border to Finland. But nonetheless, recent actions like these show that Russia continues to have an insatiable appetite for expansion. Then we head further down on the map, skipping Chasiv Yar and Osheretino, where no map changes exist, instead moving further down, as it's largely been a case of activity in the Karlivka direction for Russian forces, where they pushed slightly forward above and below Pervomeyska, as you can see there. And it would appear that for quite some time now, that the Russian forces have really wanted to control all the way up to the lakes. Although, moving beyond the small town just prior has given them some issues from the last number of weeks. So, as we can see, Russia is certainly attempting to make all of the gains that they can right now in the entirety of the remainder of the unoccupied, let's say, Donbass region. And with well over 5,000 square kilometers to go, they've got their work cut out for them. Then having a look around on the map in the east, as we saw a destroyed Russian BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system somewhere at the front. Then also we saw that members of the Ukrainian Shadow unit destroyed another Russian tank. Then also we saw a Russian infantry fighting vehicle attempting to cross a road, but it appeared that the vehicle hit a landmine, most likely due to a series of daisy-chained TM-62 anti-tank landmines or a Ratel-S mine layer, which may also have been potentially been involved in this case, as it was stated that this area was not exactly in the inhabitable zone. Then lastly, just to mention in the east, and for a bit of a change, we see a Russian Lancet drone hit a Bradley M2 infantry fighting vehicle. However, the Brat dynamic protection saved the vehicle from the strike, with a later photo displaying the more or less minimal effect with crew intact. Then we'll head all the way across to Krinky in the Kherson Oblast, as geolocated footage confirmed Ukrainian advances in Krinky towards Kazachi Lahiri. In fact, different units of the Ukrainian forces have been conducting several offensive actions in the last days and weeks, leading to minor advances on this front. Take, for instance, this recent footage of a landing and infiltration from the Ukrainian military on the left bank of the Kherson region, presumably in the Krinky area. Then back to Crimea momentarily, as in a recent development, Russia claims to have intercepted 4 US supplied ATACMS missiles over occupied Crimea on May 4th. The Russian Defense Ministry stated that the long range missiles were downed by their air defense systems, though no damage from debris was reported, with the claims remaining unverified even after a number of days now. Which is unusual, considering Russia will take any opportunity to put on display anything that looks like a win for them. Then headed across to some news for today, as German arms manufacturer Rheinmetall has pledged to support Ukraine with hundreds of thousands of shells in 2024, including prototypes of artillery shells capable of striking targets of up to 100 kilometers away. And to provide a bit of context there, your more standard or traditional 155mm artillery shell reaches about 40 kilometers in distance, or about 25 miles. So 100 kilometers or 60 miles is quite the feat. Also, the Rheinmetall CEO emphasized the critical role of artillery in the ongoing conflict, stating, quote, "The artillery is the game changer." So, to meet increased demand, Rheinmetall is heavily focusing on artillery production, aiming to produce 700,000 shells this year, a significant increase from its pre-war annual capacity of around 70,000 shells. The CEO also noted that artillery production has been declining in both the US and Europe in recent years, stating that the Western world is not prepared for a conventional war. As such, Rheinmetall plans to build new artillery plants in Germany and Lithuania, as well as a joint plant production in Ukraine dedicated to producing artillery shells, military vehicles, gunpowder, and anti-aircraft weapons. Then in some more news, France has initiated the process of integrating their AASM Hammer glide munitions with F-16 fighter jets. As confirmed by the chairman of France's Commission on Defense and the Armed Forces. So you might remember, the Hammer is a precision guidance kit placed onto unguided munitions with a range of about 70 kilometers. Now, the F-16 standard underwing weapons mounts are compatible with the AASM, requiring only software modifications to integrate the Hammers into the fire control systems. And Ukraine already receives about 50 of these per month from France, and are deployed through their existing fleet of MiG-29s for frontline engagements. Then in some more news, the United States and its G7 allies are currently engaged in discussions to construct a substantial aid package for Ukraine, potentially worth up to $50 billion. The funds for this package would be sourced from the profits generated by frozen Russian assets, which exist all over the world, but mostly in Europe and the States. So the US is spearheading this effort to secure an agreement among the G7 nations by the upcoming G7 summit in June. So this proposed military aid package, if finalized, presents a new strategic dimension to the economic sanctions imposed on Russia in response to its actions in Ukraine. Then in some more news, Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Paris yesterday to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron, marking his first visit to the EU in 5 years. The Chinese president reportedly told French media outlet Le Figaro that China wants to work with France and the international community to end the war in Ukraine. But stated like that seems a little open to interpretation, doesn't it? So despite China's declared neutrality in this war, Washington has raised concerns about Beijing's support for Moscow's defense industrial expansion efforts. Reuters also reported in April that China is aiding Russia's war machine by providing machine tools, weapons technology, satellite imagery, and other various dual-purpose goods that have both civilian and military applications. Now, unfortunately, the Chinese political apparatus has a tendency to say one thing, then do another, and at this stage they can only be measured by their follow-up actions and not by their words. Trust really needs to be earned with that country. Then headed across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, and back to the classics we go. It's harder to come across these classic style videos these days because they've simply been outlawed for them to do. So starting off, as mobilized Russian soldiers have voiced their grievances in a video lamenting the dire state of affairs they face on the front lines. The troops reveal that they have been denied vacation and rotation, having spent 11 grueling months in the forest, without respite, without any rest. Compounding their hardships, the soldiers claim that they have not received their promised pay, surprise surprise, and their requests for leave have been consistently denied. So what did they do? Well, the men decided to send a video appeal as a last resort, presumably to the Russian MOD, knowing full well that there could be severe consequences for taking such actions like these. So they think some terrible mistake has befallen them, but they're far from the first to be sold a false bill of goods about going to Ukraine. And stories like these always remind me of how we're always constantly reminded of how Russia has far greater manpower. Which is technically true, but that's only if the country goes into full mobilization, on a full war footing. But even after all of the power that Putin has consolidated in Russia, it's still an extremely difficult maneuver to pull off, which, if done, risks a destabilized country and countless mutinous events that would follow in its wake. Then headed across to a bit of a lighter segment today, as amid the turmoil of repeated attacks on Odessa in the last week or so, the resilient people of the city have found solace in the simple act of baking Easter cakes and treating their brave defenders. Just note, Ukrainian Easter is held on May 5th, and here we see a heartwarming example that captures a glimpse of the Easter breads prepared by the author, some of which were distributed at the Odessa railway station, where some members of the armed forces of Ukraine were found, while the remainder were sent to soldiers fighting on the front lines. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off today, guys. So more tank sheds have been put on display by the Russians, and they seem to be very proud of them. But it might be hard to see at first glance what exactly is going on here. So this tank, with a shed installed on top and around it, has a cope cage installed on top of that. Also, here's some super exclusive inside footage of the tank, probably from the top of the hull, also putting on display its total lack of battlefield awareness. It's like locking yourself inside a moving box. And the tank is just so big. You see, Soviet tanks have always been just that little bit tinier than their Western counterparts, but not anymore. So do these makeshift protections work? Well, on a wide variety of metrics, they actually don't. But even the most staunch supporters of these gigantic monstrosities would likely accept that a hit from a double-charged Javelin ATGM should put a vehicle like this permanently out of order. And even just a couple of FPV trick shots on the tracked wheels or the back or the top could pretty quickly render this gigantic beast pretty useless. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please feel free to like and comment. Thanks for all the support there as well. I do appreciate it all. Really do. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.